Hello, Canadian Salad listeners. Before we begin, we have a content warning. This episode discusses the Indian Act and the harms of colonial policies in Canada, including cultural erasure, forced separation of families, and systemic discrimination. These stories and details can be painful and triggering, especially for Indigenous listeners and those affected by these daily and historical realities. We share this with care and responsibility because knowing the truth is part of reconciliation. Please, from our hearts, we ask that you listen in a way that feels safe for you.
I like salad. Do you like salad?
Welcome to Canadian Salad,
A fun, factual, and friendly podcast about culture and integration in Canada.
I'm one of your hosts. I'm Ho Shen Ho from China, currently living in unceded territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
And I'm Andrea McCoy, an immigrant from the United States, broadcasting you from the unceded traditional territory of the Lekwungen people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations.
And you're listening to Canadian Salad.
Have you ever heard of Let's Go to the Mattresses?
I've never heard of that. What's that kind of saying?
It's from The Godfather.
Oh, I
think
never watched The Godfathers.
It was quoted in a movie that I saw. So the movie was quoting the movie The Godfather. I don't know. Let's go to the mattresses. Anyway, we're not.
Have you ever watched The Godfathers?
Yes.
Okay,
And I was
I have not.
traumatized.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have not watched that.
No,
Not really my
I
thing,
will.
yeah.
I'll remove. I won't say any of the gross details of violence. But anyway, thankfully, this podcast is not about The Godfather.
But the violence was, is kind
Violence
of like
is
implied.
tied to this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Today's topic, yeah.
Today's topic, yes. And in light of Truth and Reconciliation and the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, September 30th, we thought it appropriate to actually talk about something that I honestly don't know if a lot of people still realize exists, but we're going to talk about the Indian Act. Yeah. Yeah. And that it's an act that, well, there's just, we're going to unpack it a little bit and just recognize maybe what Indigenous voices have to say about it, but then what is our role as uninvited guests, uninvited settlers, immigrants to Canada, in advocating and using our own culture and our own education and awareness to resist colonialism and to work hard towards self-governance and self-autonomy that is essential for Indigenous people here in Canada. So that is our episode. So I do want to do a quick disclaimer. I am going to be reading excerpts from the Indian Act, which can be quite jarring and triggering. We're saying Indian Act because that is the term in the actual legislation that is currently alive and well in Canada, but we'll unpack that Indian name a little bit later. So, Hoshin, I'm curious, actually, because I didn't learn about the Indian Act until 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Even though I was been here for like 6 years at the time, I hadn't known about it. Had you?
I mean, in Roy Rose, I remember the one we talk about, like First Nations here, we have talked about like Indian Act. Even I remember there with this discussion about lineage and having like a identification to prove your Indian kind of heritage.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember that. And then I remember it was like, and they said something, that kind of, there's a specific requirement or something in the Indian Act. It's like, oh, wow, you have a whole act to tell how to keep track of your lineage. That's crazy.
Right.
I just remember thinking that way. Yeah.
Yeah. I was in that same class with you. I think I remember some of the more jarring information that we were given about what Indigenous people endured. But for me, I attended a community development workshop with the Victoria Native Friendship Center. And I was in the room along with police officers, just nurses, regular everyday folks who were a part of this cohort. And we talked about the Indian Act, and we talked about healing from and moving forward and what reconciliation looks like. Anyway, and that was where it was really, really unpacked for me much later. So, yeah. So we're going to unpack what is the Indian Act. We're going to talk about some some different Indigenous voices and how they perceive or have which perspectives they have regarding the Indian Act, and then some broader reflections as it relates to our responsibility with truth and reconciliation, but also the importance of culture. And much of what we're going to talk about is based on two books that I think especially everyone needs to read. So the first one, I'm going to hold it up as though people are watching, but the first one is 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. This is written by Bob Joseph, and he just came out this year with a sequel called 21 Things You Need to Know About Indigenous Self-Government. So it's a conversation about dismantling the act. But I highly recommend both of these, Bob Joseph. I don't know if you've read these, Hoshin, but highly recommend.
No.
And I got an autographed copy of his second one. So.
Ooh,
I know.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I know.
You can
This
brag.
girl's getting around. Bob, I don't know you, but I'd love to do lunch sometime. So the Indian Act, according to Bob Joseph, it was one of the most damaging colonial tools ever enacted. But understanding it is really, really key to dismantling the Indian Act, he says. So it originated in 1876, and it was a consolidation of colonial policies into one ginormous act, right? Essentially, it was designed to control every aspect of Indigenous life, including land, governance, identity, culture, education, health, lineage, social structures, self-governance. All of that was completely controlled by early European colonizers. And I want to highlight three key harms that really kind of paint, there's like a lot in the
harms.
Indian Act. There's a lot of harms. Oh my gosh, too much. But we're going to highlight three because I don't know that people understand other components of it. I think many of us have maybe heard about residential schools. We have heard about reserves. We have these basic concepts, but there's some other things that are really, really essential that really, really destroyed cultures and communities and people. So first one is bans on ceremonies, which would be like potlatch and Sundance. Okay. And these weren't just like, we're going to get together and have like a wine and dine. These were really instrumental culturally. They were for the passing of names, of titles, for distributing wealth. They were establishing ranks of certain people within the community, celebrating weddings, births, or marking the passing of elders and leaders and chiefs. It was one of their core components of self-governance. You would come to potlatch, you would come to Sundance, and these key decisions or key events would happen that would shape the community. And it wasn't just like one person, kind of like what we imagine in colonial contexts where you have just like one crusty old white guy just up there reading his policies and laws. Like it was very communal. It was very distributed. Many voices from the community would participate in this. It wasn't like this very different structure that we have now.
I think, yeah. I mean, ceremonies. Imagine if like now we cancel like a Sunday mass on Christmas, for example, or just Sunday mass in general.
Sure.
Or any kind of gathering for Christmas, or your, Christmas morning present giving, all this is canceled. I think people gotta be really pissed too.
They would be, yeah. If you told all the patriots of Canada that we're going to abolish Canada Day, and you're not going to be celebrated, no fireworks. Yeah. In fact, if you are caught, you will go to jail. You will serve prison time,
if you
or we'll probably beat you up. Yeah. And that's exactly what was done if it was found out that people were observing potlatch, if they were going to Sundance. So many people, when the Indian Act came into place, many of them, they went underground. Children in residential schools were told that potlatches actually lead to poverty. Like you're poor because you observe potlatch. And this is one that makes me so angry coming from a Christian background, but also not surprised. But they also said that Christianity would fill the void from not observing potlatch. Like, okay, so you can't observe potlatch, but guess what? We have Christianity and that's going to fill the void. Which goes to show they completely did. I mean, they did and they didn't know exactly what potlatch was, like how foundational it was for sustaining their community and establishing governance. In the sense of like to equate Christianity and like, that kind of structure. they don't
They think it's the same
mate.
thing. Yeah.
They think it's the same
it's
thing.
interchangeable. Yeah, it's the same thing.
It's not. It's
Yeah.
not. And so I want to read this quote. It's from Jude Alfred Scow in 1992. He says this about the ban on ceremonies. Quote, this provision of the Indian Act was in place for close to 75 years. And what that did was it prevented the passing down of our oral history. It prevented the passing down of our values. It meant an interruption of the respected forms of government that we used to have. And we did have forms of government, be they oral and not in writing, before any of the Europeans came to this country. We had a system that worked for us. We respected each other. We had ways of dealing with disputes, end quote. So it was values, it was governance, it was law, it was like all of these things. And to take that away, that generational governance and just the legacy and the history and the language, of course, was also gone too. Because I think in many of us, or in even my mind, in just my ignorance and not being aware, I think of, the residential schools were like huge about completely whitewashing education, memory, completely eradicating any kind of history, cultural or oral traditions that Indigenous communities had. It did that, but then it was also so much more on the community level. Like the children was one thing, and then the community was an entirely other thing.
The elder also had to, they forbidding, as you said, ban them to passing down any of that information. Also forbidding any kind of gatherings for any of this conversation to be had. It's definitely a multifaceted approach to eliminate, in some sense, their culture, their identity. Any of the ways they pass down any of this knowledge is they were eliminated.
And it's very anti-community, which is a way that many colonizers would default to, is like the more that we can control the narrative, the more we can separate people and keep them minimal numbers, the less chance they'll have of revolting, of revolution, of any kind of thing, right?
I mean, it's normal, right? That if I want to control this new group, I definitely try my best would not let this group to congregate, because whenever there's congregation, there's chance they can talk about how to like revolt, like you mentioned, how to like gather together and then fight back, right? So I think as a colonizer, you have to make sure that none of these people can congregate.
Right. Which I think goes to show they knew exactly what they were doing was wrong. They knew exactly. Like literally.
I think they definitely do.
Oh my gosh.
How would they not know?
Like you don't do something and be like, oh yeah, it's going to be great. Roses and cherry blossoms.
Yeah,
oopsie, you're
just
upset? Of course they would be upset. And that's why they did what they did. Anyway. So that's, that's, yeah.
One more thing is this is like, I hate also this is a constant, there's a very normal kind of a narrative that, this colonizer trying to educate them because they are uncivilized. We are trying to give them another civilized way to deal with things. And I think that is just a BS excuse, because as we just, talked about, they definitely know what they are doing. The civilized is just excuse. Not to mention, they already civilized. In many ways, I feel like you're the barbarian one. You here put a flag on the land and it's saying claim it is yours. Like I don't know who's most civilized.
Who is civilized in this story? The one who's committing genocide, or the one who's like not? Sorry, exactly. I think the people who are civilized are the ones who are not. You're absolutely right. Yeah, it's
I just think the excuse.
It is an excuse, and to say, they didn't know. Well, no, they did.
They did. We're not 6 years old, okay?
No, we're not.
We know
idiots.
what's happening.
Yes. Yeah. The second harm that we're going to highlight is the pass system to control movement. So a pass system was created to monitor and control the movement of Indigenous people. And this was largely done through creating what they would call, quote unquote, Indian agents. So you would have government officials who would be stationed at these like headquarters or cabins in certain parts of Canada, and certain communities living on certain reserves had to report to that Indian agent in order to go visit family. That kind of a thing. It was designed to, keep people just very separated, right? Like stay on reserve. In In 1889, parents were required to have passes to visit with their children interned at residential schools. So if they wanted to visit their kids, they had to get an approved pass. But that pass may not be approved because it was all depending on whether they got a hold of that Indian agent or if he was maybe in a good mood that day.
Oh my God.
There's no telling. So this is out of the book, Bob Joseph's book. He says that Indians would occasionally have to travel many days by foot to the Indian agent's house, not knowing if he would be there when they arrived. If the agent was away, they would either have to camp and wait or return home. The pass system was also a means of maintaining a separation between Indians and the European farmers, which seems illogical considering the government's goal of assimilation. It's hard to achieve assimilation if the target population is isolated on reserves. The pass system restricted Indians' access to local towns in order to prevent Indian farmers from wasting their time when they should be tending their crops, which they were restricted from selling. So basically, this pass basically just, again, it was another means to isolate and to control. If you violated that, if you said, let's say, I didn't get a pass, so I'm going to go see my kid, certain privileges that you were given, quote unquote, were withheld, or rations, because, of course, limiting food was also something that colonizers did. So then maybe they wouldn't give or allow you to hunt a certain amount of meat that week because you violated the pass system. But more often people were arrested if they violated this. When it come to parents meeting with their children, they could only meet them 4 times a year.
Oh.
That's it. If they had a pass.
But like what you just said also in that quote, it makes me angry in the sense that like I feel like a lot of excuse or use part of is, no matter it's residential school or banning of ceremonies, again, they were trying to, we're trying to civilize, we're trying to educate them, we're trying to assimilate them, we're trying to teach them what is the better way to live. But then at the same time, like this pass agreement, yet another example of not helping them to assimilate or learn your way is you try to isolate them. In many ways, you try to kill them both, culturally and also not letting them
socially
have time. Yeah, and socially and even economically, like for all the farming as well. You are not quote unquote helping them in any way, no matter whatever excuse you want to use about civilize, try to civilize them or assimilate them. The rules in the Act was not showing that you're trying to do that.
Right. No,
you're trying to murder them in every way possible.
In every way, yeah. Suffocating every ounce of identity, of belonging, of community, culture, language, tradition, family possible.
Every ounce of it.
Everything. So this is, I'll just read a little bit of the quote. This is by Hayter Reed. He was an assistant Indian commissioner in 1885. And this is a part I want to just prepare our audiences. So this could be a triggering quote. But I think it's important because this is the complete attitude of our government at the very beginning. Many people will say, Sir Johnny MacDonald, he was our first, prime minister. You know what? He was the genocide king.
Genocide king. That's
how I remember him. And what he designed and what many people designed is reflected in this quote. So the quote is, no rebel Indians should be allowed off the reserves without a pass signed by an ID official. The dangers of complications with white men will thus be lessened. And by preserving a knowledge of individual movements, any inclination to petty depredations may be checked by the facility of apprehending those who commit such offenses. End quote. Yeah.
It's heavy.
It's very heavy.
It's very heavy.
Deep breath.
Whew, deep breath.
Yeah. But this was one aspect that is in the Indian Act. And while there have been amendments and there have been, changes to that, much of this is still in law today. We're going to get into Indian title and the name Indian and status. So the third harm I'm going to highlight is defining, quote, Indian status. In 1876, an Indian was, quote, any male person of, quote, Indian blood, and were reported to belong to a particular band. An Indian was any child of such a person. An Indian was any woman who is or was lawfully married to such a person. The term was basically based on genetics, right? So if you look Indian, but it was subject to the colonizers.
Male.
Right? You're Indian. You're other. It was very much designed to put them into a basket, just like they did with Chinese people or Japanese people, right? Prior to 1951, the act actually defined a person as, quote, an individual other than Indian, end quote. So Indigenous people were not considered a person, which is really key to understanding, because the only avenue by which an Indigenous person would be recognized as a person is if they did not register their Indian status. This still happens today. We read about it or hear headlines where people, because there are some legal benefits and there are some legal commitments that the government of Canada has made within the Indian Act. But basically recognizing that anyone who is not Indian is a person, basically, it's a way for that person to not only give up their Indian status, but it is also known as voluntary enfranchisement. So once an Indigenous person became a person or a people, they assumed all the other rights as other Canadians, but it also meant that people had to give up associated legal rights, benefits, and restrictions of being a status Indian. So the fact that even, because you've probably heard about even in the States, like in during the time that colonizers there were enslaving African and Caribbean people, in the Declaration of Independence, enslaved people were still 3/5 of a man. They weren't considered a whole person. This is the same kind of rhetoric in the Indian Act, that you're not a person if you are Aboriginal, if you are Indian, if you are Indigenous, right? And we're the ones who determine that, essentially. And so this has been a very, I think it was my hairdresser who is Métis, and he moved from Alberta to BC. But what happens is when you leave the province that you're registered in, you have to reapply to be acknowledged or registered as an Indigenous person in BC. It doesn't carry over. Any thoughts before we move on to Indigenous perspectives of?
I personally think, like, I remember I had a conversation with a person, this lovely lady. I forgot her name. I only met her once because we were both invited to like a chat, like a talk show or something. And then we were both being interviewed. And then so I had a little brief conversation with her. She is half, at least she said she's half. One of her parents is Indigenous, the other parent's white, and then she got adopted by white parents.
Okay.
But she still has her Indigenous status. And at that time, and then at that time, I didn't really know what it means to have Indigenous status. I was like, so do you mean like your car show that you are Indigenous? I was like, yeah, we Indigenous, like people had a specific ID that proved that they are Indigenous. I was like, why do you need a different ID? Like, what would that do? Why, like, under Canada? Because again, I just assume we're all the same. Like, why would you need a different ID? You're Canadian, right? So yeah, I'm Canadian. Then why you have a different ID than the others? Why would that be any difference? She didn't really get into it. She just said, well, being Indian in Canada, you're subject to certain benefits, but also restrictions. And then, and some people just need to carry it because either you carry it, some people carry to honor the indigenous traditions because that's who they are, who they're proud of. Because to give it up means, you admit, in some you admit you're not Indigenous, like official, like on record.
Right.
And it's like, okay, like the record kind of deny your heritage is.
Yeah.
Anyway, and that conversation was very confusing for me. I remember but on the colonial sense, I understand is also a way to like, something to dehumanize, or like give them this kind of like degrading terms. I think there's also there's a level of complexity on it about identity too. Complexity about like some people really want because I am like you can't. and to give it up, and sometimes also it's like what she says to deny. Now I have to deny that
Sure.
I'm not no longer one.
Right.
And some people are
Right.
proud, really proud Indigenous, like
Yeah.
they really want that.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of complexity into that
It
topic.
is. It is. And we're going to get into even the complexity of the perspective of the Indian Act
Hmm.
by Indigenous people, because the reality is it is complex, and identity is like, no, there's no broad brush stroke that you can just paint. Well, you know, all Indigenous people think this way. All Chinese people think this
Hmm.
way. All Mexican people think this way. That's not, there's
Everyone thinks the
complexity, there's
same.
give and pull, there's tug and war, there's lots of gray, and there's lots of things in between.
I
Um,
agree.
So yeah, and I will say, this is based off his book and what I've read. So forgive me, I am not claiming to be at all part of the Indigenous community of Canada, but it is something that in reading the book, it really paints a bigger picture, and that's why reading his book is really, really important for our education, to really understand. In 1969, the subject of the Indian Act was really at the forefront of politicians at that time, and a lot of Aboriginal circles. There was a white paper that was written about the complete demoralization of the Indian Act, the inhumane and human rights abuses of it. And this was under Justin Trudeau's dad, Trudeau. And so
Pierre Trudeau.
Pierre, yes. So Pierre, quote, wanted to eliminate all of the special arrangements for status Indians and wished to have them absorbed into the broader Canadian political community, end quote. Which on paper, maybe that sounds like, oh yeah, united for all, there's no distinction, like kind of this color blindedness. And so it might sound good on the surface, but then there was widespread opposition to having this happen, to abolishing the Indian Act, because this idea led to the fact that there's things that the government of Canada is legally bound to that is outlined in the Indian Act itself. And to abolish that removes the government's legal obligation to communities.
To take care, yeah.
Right?
For retribution or yeah.
Not that they've actually, held up their end of the deal for the most part. But there are guarantees in there. It's the Proclamation Act of 1873 with King Charles. King Charles made this declaration that the Indigenous people are to have their own, self-governance, and that they are just a people in and of themselves. And if you get rid of like an old white guy, crusty English declaration like that, like you're actually eliminating something that was so crucial, especially around that time. Yeah. So basically, it was very much that the Indian Act had legally distinguished between First Nations and other Canadians, and it acknowledged that the federal government had a unique relationship with and an obligation to First Nations. Okay. But it was Harold Cardinal he headed the Indian Association of Alberta. He actually opposed the white paper and the call to abolish the Indian Act. And he said, quote, "We do not want the Indian Act retained because it is a good piece of legislation. It isn't. It is discriminatory from start to finish. But it is a lever in our hands and an embarrassment to the government, as it should be. No just society, and no society with even pretensions to being just, can long tolerate such a piece of legislation. But we would rather continue to live in bondage under the inequitable Indian Act than surrender our sacred rights."
Good job. Wow, that's really well versed.
It's kind of like this. It sounds like a paradox, but I love what he says. Like, it is an embarrassment to the government, as it should be, and to get rid of it is to, in some sense, get rid of the terrible embarrassment that you as a country, you as a government, have done.
Yeah, I know. It's right? To get rid of the proof that you are this ugly, entity to impose. This kind of thing, yeah. I agree. Yeah. I also especially love that about they prefer that to bondage, give away their sacred rights. Yeah. I think that's also something I should mention is the paradox of it. To give up, to abolish these acts, and one way is give themselves freedom, but which not completely is freedom, because this so-called freedom is to completely immerse himself or assimilate to the white colonial way, which you have to give away their right to self-governance and their own traditions of how they make decisions in their communities. So the only way, as of right now, I think for now, is to keep the act so that they don't have to give away that right.
And I, just to kind of tag on that, I think that his last line of saying, then surrender our sacred rights, kind of like you were saying, it's almost this elevation of like, our rights are sacred by Creator. They are not sacred by your government. Like, you don't give us the right to be who we are. We give us the right. Creator gives us the right. And so it is this kind of like, you may have this piece of paper. This does not define us, right? Our rights are bigger than that. So, but it is, I mean, and there's lots of different voices on this. I mean, there's lots of advocates who do want it abolished. And I think, it's not my job to police anyone's perspective on this act of legislation, because I never had to live under the hand of it. At the same time, like, I think it's very colonial to say like, well, which side of the argument are you on? Which side of the fence are you on? What are you going to take? And that's not black and white. It. No, it's not.
Yeah, it's not black and white. Yeah, as you said, like, yeah, it's really such a disgusting thing to have this kind of act, but then also the act also gives them that legal right and that legal framework for them to continue the things that not like self-governance, the thing that they know is inherently their right, that the right that they can, how they want to be with their people, how they want to do with their own people. So it's not black and white in many ways.
Yeah, exactly. The former national chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Phil Fontaine, on self-government and replacing the Indian Act, he says, quote, "We must eliminate First Nations poverty and ensure fairness and justice for the first peoples of this land. Reconciliation means there will be an end to First Nations poverty and the discriminatory funding policies and practices of the federal government towards First Nation governments, communities, and citizens. Replace the Indian Act regime with true self-government." End quote. And this is Bob Joseph's sequel. It's like what you need to know about Indigenous self-government and dismantling the act. I think there's a big difference between abolish and dismantle. And I think that's where I think sometimes I wrestle with, because I'm just like, abolish guns, I like in the States, or if there's any law that's like hurting people, it's like, well, just abolish it. And I think there's a time and a place for sure to have that. And then I hear people like Bob and even my business mentor, and they're all about, let's transform the system rather than burn it down. Let's dismantle it. Let's rebuild it. Let's do something that we're not completely annihilating it in our path. But there will be voices, absolutely, who are justified to say, let's burn it all down, because they've lived through hell under this act and they've experienced things that we can't even imagine.
Yeah. I think I can see both. I understand like abolish is like complete, as you said, burn it to the ground. Dismantle is like taking it piece by piece down and see whether we can make it these pieces, it's like more gradual and in many ways less dramatic approach of transforming something. But the thing is, the goal of both thing is to make something go away and put something new on it. Something new, a more better version of it to be on it.
Yeah. And I think that duality is so important to remember, especially when we advocate or when we educate ourselves, because I think it's really easy to just go to, polar opposites of
one end to the other. Yeah.
Right. Instead of like, okay, I need to sit kind of in the middle. I need to hold both of these together. And maybe the other ones in between that we haven't even touched on. Right. And there was another gal married 2 acts early. She fought against the act, discrimination against gender discrimination. Because if you read it, it's very much like it strips women away of so many rights, which many Indigenous cultures were matriarchal, right? They had the matriarch, right? So women then all of a sudden became even more colonized in the sense that like her identity belonged to being in marriage with her husband, which within many indigenous cultures, that was not necessarily
It's the
at all
opposite,
the
yeah.
case, right?
Yeah, I thought,
Yeah.
and isn't the indigenous like status, the lineage also follows the male line rather than female line?
That's a good question. I think it probably varies, but I do know like the colonial mindset was very much the patrilineal. It goes through the
Yeah,
husband, right?
yeah.
But she introduced in 1985 Bill C-31, which restored status to women and children unfairly stripped of it because there were conditions that happened that basically, well, then you are no longer Indian status. Because the male is no longer around or alive or things like that. So very discriminatory. But she resisted and she reframed it and she introduced a bill and it got passed, you know. So there's ways to dismantle it and work within the system in order to change the system. I think if we're shifting away from the harm, like it still is obviously in effect today. Like, you know, reserves, a lot of people, I think it was my brother who was like, oh, a reserve is just where indigenous communities live, right? And I'm like, no, it's like the
No.
forced location of many of them. Many people don't realize that reserves were created by the government for this, you know, absolute control over people. Status still determines access to rights and services. Some people may not be able to register their status because of bureaucracy or because of change in political power or laws. We're seeing a lot of infrastructure bills coming through the Liberal government right now, and a lot of them are bypassing Indigenous self-governance or Indigenous consultation, which is outlined in the Truth and Reconciliation Act, which in the UNDRIP, right, which is what Canada has committed to. There's also constant legal challenges regarding, what's legal anymore and what isn't, and this is 21st century. And then these piecemeal amendments sometimes can get glossed over. So they might ignore, this part of the act was amended and actually says this now, where with like land rights and stuff. And it's like, well, we're just going to ignore that and kind of work out our own thing. But regardless of how the act continues, Indigenous people are still resisting today. They resisted when the colonizers first came. They resisted when the heavy hand of colonization was upon them, and they're still resisting today. They're still using courts and international law like UNDRIP advocacy, and even a lot of international human rights agencies to basically say these are our rights as recognized by international law. They are resurging their cultural practices. So the First Peoples Cultural Council of BC, it's a Crown organization, meaning that it has money directly funded from the Crown to populate projects and to fund projects for cultural revitalization, language revitalization, bringing back cultures and traditions, drumming circles, whatever it takes for communities to bring that back because it was eradicated for so long. Indigenous people are doing that. That language piece too, which I think many people, if you look down the generations, one or two people in many communities only know the actual language of their original ancestors because they didn't have that language knowledge. So ways to like record it and have conversations, because some people who know those language holders or knowledge keepers are 80 years old, 90 years old. And so these projects are ways in order to bring that back and to honor it. And even their ceremonies, like reviving ceremonies. I was at Red Barn, which is a grocery store here on the island.
I know, I like Red Barn.
Yeah, but Alberta may not have it. Anyway, Red Barn, if you're listening from Alberta, thank you so much. But yeah, there was a lady there, and she and I have talked every now and then. And I said, "Oh, how was your weekend?" She's like, "Oh, we did our canoe journey." And I was like, "Oh tell me more about that. I'd love to hear." And so she told me about this canoe journey and how specifically important it is for her people. It's a ceremony marking extreme significance. And so you just hear like those things are happening again, and they're not. I hope that they're not being punished. I mean, land defenders are being punished. In many ways, some communities are still being punished, but those ceremonies are reviving. And people are practicing this again and coming back to their ancestral roots. So that's really, really important. I think if we were to reflect on Joseph's view, resistance to colonization and resistance to even the Indian Act, it's not solely about the rejection of the law or the act. but it's reclaiming that sovereignty and that identity. Because you can abolish the act, go for it. But what are you going to do to revive the people, their identity, their language, their culture, their own sovereignty and their own self-governance? Like the two cannot happen without each other. And so that's kind of my takeaway from Joseph's book. And I think I'd love to hear, Hoshin, from you, but I think if we're thinking about broader reflections, I think a few things. Culture is a huge way to resist colonization, and it still is a way to resist assimilation and oppression. It's leaning into the things that you identify with in your own culture, right? It's the Lunar New Year. It's the observance of Dia de los Muertos for me. It is those pieces that make you who you are. Not just, I'm Canadian now, so I don't really do this. It's no, this is what I've done and this is who I am. I also think that even though the Indian Act tried to erase culture has become the place where resistance and survival has immortalized itself. The culture might be eradicated, but it is cultural practices that helped culture revive itself, if that makes sense.
Cultural practices, to revive.
Yes, cultural practice to revive. Yes, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you. I think, culture is always a great form of resilience and rejection, even, or colonization, right? Because colonization itself is called colonize. They're trying to take away and erase whatever you had before. So to be able to practice it, to be able to keep that culture itself is the biggest, FU to colonials itself. Because you're trying to take us down, but we are not. We're still standing here. We're still practicing that culture one way or the other. It still live through our, live through our blood, our minds, and through our generations.
Absolutely.
So I think it's always important to remind ourselves that don't give in to colonization, and just what you just said, that I think would be correct is, it's not because you live in Canada now that you don't need to practice all the other culture, the culture that you brought in here with you. Yeah. I think more important, because you are immigrant, moved here now, is way more important for you to practice the culture that you are from, because it's part of you. Unless you really want to strip away whatever culture identity you had before you coming here, unless that's your intent, then don't practice any of that. If you want to maintain who you are and maintain that root that you have with your family back home, with your friends back home, then you have definitely need to take more time to practice your culture, reconnect with it, right, and find like-minded folks to have find space to to create the space, even to gather, to social, to share. Yeah.
No, it's really, really good. And I hope that our listeners and even us, we just continue to realize that, ultimate self-autonomy, self-governance, the agency to decide who you are for yourself is a right deserved by all people. And the more we educate ourselves on what was and what is, the better we will be able to dismantle, change, renew systems in place to make them better for everyone. And so that's my call to action for everyone. It's just to educate yourself. Like, honestly,
I agree.
To
I need to read that book.
To read that book. Listen to Indigenous podcasts.
2 books, actually.
Yeah, media. Yeah, 2 books, exactly. And they're really pretty. I really love the graphic design on them. But yeah, so just educate yourself and understand that it's an incredible gift that we have, that we can actually read this, understand this, have access to this information, this truthful history about this country, and change it. So
yes,
for the better. Agree. Anyway, that's our episode.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. But now let's go to Canadian pop quiz. If you're new to our episode, we always do a little pop quiz that related to the topic today, and we both don't know what we're gonna ask, obviously.
That's true.
And so now see, test our knowledge of things.
Yes, it is our knowledge, our
Andrea,
very big
do you
brains.
Want to go first?
Yes, I would love to. Okay, what percentage of the population of a country is needed to make sustainable, lasting, and successful change?
What percentage of population of a country?
Of a country, Yeah.
Okay, so it's a general statement then.
Yes.
20%.
20%. Okay. Is that your final answer?
Yeah.
Okay. The actual number is 3.5%.
You only need 3 points to mobilize.
3.5% of the population, if mobilized, and they're participating in active resistance. Historically speaking, that's all that is required to successfully, sustainably make change. So this is I highly recommend the TED Talk. It was from Erica Chenoweth. She's a political scientist at Harvard University, and she studied over 400 civil or basically conflicts around the world, and basically found that it didn't take much of the population to make something change.
To change a country. Okay.
Yes.
Good to know.
3.5%. So when you think about like things like Palestine, or you think about like advocacy for Indigenous people, we're not talking large numbers. We're talking 3.5% of the population. Like it can be done.
You can be that 3%.
Yes.
You can
Be the 3.5%. That's right.
You always be the 3.5. That should be the logo.
That should be.
You can be that
right.
3.5.
That's right. You, 3.5. And the decimal could be your face. So 3, you, face, 3, 5. Anyway, that's my question. There you go. And we'll put the link in our show notes. Yes, from BBC article. Yep.
Mine is very, I think, easy, I guess. There's also another, not called India, but also an act. It's a Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act.
Okay.
Promoting Indigenous rights to self-determination, culture, and autonomy, which is very different than the Indians Act. Sometimes even opposite. This act is established by UN.
Okay.
Do you know which year they published it?
Is this the UNDRIP or is this a different one?
It's the UNDRIP.
It's the UNDRIP. Okay.
The UN, UNDRIP.
The UN, okay.
United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Yep. Yeah. 2015.
Ooh, a bit more recent. It's 2021.
2021?
Yeah.
You know what? We're there. We got it. Like if you think about everything that people have been through, and we're just now, but we're here. So thanks be to God.
It's very recent. I know.
Yeah. Wow. It's
That's
only
the
4 years
UNDRIP.
old.
I know we mentioned the UNDRIP. We never really said what it was. We just UNDRIP, yes.
Yes, the UNDRIP.
But that's
if you don't know the UNDRIP, you need to have coffee with me. Now you know. That's right. Educate yourself. That's right. You can even type in UNDRIP in Google and it'll show you. It's not very hard. Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. If you're new to us, thank you so much. We really, really value new listeners, and we value your reviews of our podcast so that we can spread the love, spread the fun, and spread the truth telling that we like to bring to this podcast. So please, if you're listening on Spotify or wherever you're listening, please leave a review. Share with your friends and family. And if you'd like to find us, we are on social media, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. And we'd love to, just hear what you have to say. Let us know.
Leave a comment.
Yeah, leave a comment. Let us know.
Tell us how amazing we sound.
So amazing.
Yeah.
Yes. and whether or not you want to be our friends, because we like meeting new friends. So,
I have a lot of friends already.
Oh, too many. Sorry. I don't.
I'm kidding.
So you can email me, hello@canadiansalad.ca, or visit our website, canadiansalad.ca, for more information. That's my shameless plug. Thank you so much.
Yes.
We'll I hope everyone takes time and takes care for Truth and Reconciliation Day, and we will.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe we should, our Truth and Reconciliation Day, we should all go buy a book or two.
Yes.
And, go to the beach or grass or whatever at home. Read a little, think something about the Indigenous Act.
Yeah, absolutely. And think of, if you have Indigenous friends or people who have been impacted by the Indian Act residential schools, just provide a lot of care and check in on them. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.
Talk to you next week. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Canadian Salad is written and produced in British Columbia, Canada by Hoshin Ho and Andrea McCoy. Theme music is by Naver Avatyan from Pixabay.
This has been a Good Drinklin production.